Hi, in this video we will be talking about Tier 2, second part of Tier 2 that you could choose from in this course, how neighborhoods feed and make money. And we can start with, in this video for the first part, we can start with defining the problem, which involves sources of poverty and how can capitalism exploit us, types of wealth and forms of capital. Here's a brainstorming activity. I want you to think of as many types of poverty for a chosen community of yours or a country, and give reasons for that type of poverty that's present for each type of poverty, and write them down. After that, I want you to go to YouTube and I want you to look up poverty DW as in DWTV, and then you can research some more information about a specific country or neighborhood in a country, let's say. And so there's a lot to find over here, like some titles. This could be in the US, or the rich, the poor, and the trash, inequality becomes power, Germany's poor pensioners, born poor, die poor, how to tackle poverty, what to do about rising rents, inequality. It's a very rich content, and so feel free to look at all of these, and not all of these, I mean choose from them. And also there's also, if you can also research the poverty in the DWTV, but also you can say poverty with COVID, with the COVID crisis. So you can get here specifically for inequalities with the coronavirus, and it's also in specific countries. They talk about the UK, there's Barcelona, there's so many countries, and there's also in Lebanon, if you want something about the current context. And so this is a good, I recommend this channel for looking up a good perspective, let's say.
Some seem to think that capitalism is about buying and selling things, using the market as a way of distributing goods from the folks who produce it to the folks who consume it. Markets are indeed an important phenomenon, but they don't have any unique relationship with capitalism. For example, in the American slave South, a different system, a slave system, the goods produced by slaves, for example, cotton, were sold. So you had a market in cotton. You actually had a market in slaves, too. So things were bought and sold all over the place. Markets existed, but you didn't have capitalism. You didn't have an employer and an employee. That's the core of capitalism. Slavery is a different system. It's a master and a slave. The master doesn't hire the slave. There's no need. The master owns the slave. In capitalism, the employer doesn't own you. May feel like that occasionally, but he doesn't legally own you. In feudalism, it's yet again different. It's a lord and a serf who kind of belongs on the land, has obligations to the lord, but the lord doesn't hire the serf, doesn't pay him a wage, but there were markets in serfdom. The unique thing about capitalism is not therefore a market. The unique thing about capitalism is the relationship in production, in how goods and services are produced. It's a relationship that is not master-slave, that is not lord-serf. It is a very particular arrangement, employer-employee. And in that relationship lies a fundamental conflict, tension, anger, resentment. Why? Because some people are doing all the work and producing more than they get. A more that we nowadays call the surplus, the extra. And if you're a capitalist, an employer, what of course is your interest? To give the worker the least possible while getting the most out of them, because that's the biggest surplus they can get. And the more surplus they have, the more secure they'll be. In capitalism, it turns out we've got exactly the same kind of system as we had in slavery and feudalism. Why? Because the worker has to produce more, a surplus, than he gets. Just as the master got the surplus the slave produced, or the feudal lord got the surplus that the serf produced. It's nobody's fault. It's the way the system is set up. What's the alternative? When the people who produce the surplus, the workers, are themselves the people who get the surplus. If all the workers together make a cooperative, then they aren't split between the employers and the employees, because both positions are occupied by every person in the operation. There's no split. How would that work? Take any factory, take any office, take any store, change it as follows. No more board of directors, don't need it. Here's how we're going to do it. You come to work and you sit around making the decisions. All the decisions that used to be made by the capitalists. Workers become their own board of directors. Or to say the same thing another way, the worker-capitalist division dissolves. If you made all the workers democratically get together and decide how to distribute the wealth they've all together created, they would never give a handful of people more money than they know what to do with, while everybody else is worrying about sending their kid to college because they can't afford it. When you're discussing a new technology that might pollute the air or the water, the decision is made by the major shareholders and the board of directors, a tiny group of people who typically live in gated communities in a lovely leafy residence far away from the factory or the office or the store that pollutes. So they can make the investment in the new technology and reap the profits. If the workers who live and work and depend on the enterprise made the decisions, they wouldn't do it that often because they're the ones that breathe the air and drink the water. So they'd be much more sensitive to the real cost. Every technological invention justified itself on the grounds that by this new machine we could get more done with less effort. But when those innovations are put into a capitalist economic system, the people who put the technology in want to make profit out of it. For example, if a machine allows the workers to do twice as much as before, they fire half of the workforce. The remaining half works with the new machine, produces as much as before. The company realizes a fantastic profit because it doesn't have to pay half the workers' wages, which they can keep for themselves. Here's an alternative. Let every worker do half as much work as he or she did before. Let's run the working day 4 hours instead of 8. The workers will have engaged an enormous amount of leisure to pay attention to their own development, to their families, to their communities. If we use technology that way, we would use it to help the mass of people enjoy a better life rather than a small percentage of the people enjoy a greater profit. The problem was never with technology. The problem was with the system that decides how to use that technology. You're going to have to get rid of the capitalist system where it lives, in the stores, the factories, and the offices.
In permaculture, there are 8 forms of capital, and there was an article that was written by Ethan Ronald, and he describes the 8 forms of capital, which I'm going to go through over here. So he says that he was part of the organizing and facilitation team for financial permaculture. And they basically, financial permaculture goes beyond the traditional permaculture approach to economics and asks the question what it would look like if we redesigned the global financial system using permaculture principles. And what if our financial system looked more like an ecosystem? So in 2009, Catherine Austin Fitts presented Mapping Financial Ecosystems. And these capital tools were mapped in the local community. They explored the flows of money between entities and discussed how vibrant local economies are more defined by the flows of money rather than by the pools. Something wasn't sitting right to them at that point, and they kept on talking about money as if it were the only form of capital. Even though there was a growing awareness that acres of land, board feet of timber, and tons of carbon might also be part of the ecosystematic economy. At one point of the open space sessions, they began to realize a more complete map of capital. Now, this led them to the 8 forms of capital. The Oxford American Dictionary states that the capital is wealth in the form of money or other assets, and a valuable resource of a particular kind. What are these other assets then? So he has never seen a whole map of the whole different types of valuable resources. In Permaculture's design manual, Bill Morrison offers and expands on a categorization of assets based on their potential: degenerative, generative, procreative, informal, and conservative. These always seem like a good way to think about things, but not in a tangible way. So he wanted something that would be more helpful for understanding the complex transactions and exchanges swirling around people and around human beings and as a global community. So he considered mapping the financial ecosystems exercise, and the bigger picture began to emerge, and the flows of the mayor of a hypothetical small town started to be more evident. The mayor might have some money, for example, like the financial capital. A good mayor would probably have many friends in the town and some influence, so that's called social capital. The mayor who has a degree in economics knows the stock market extremely well. She or he uses the intellectual capital to generate more money, which is a financial capital example, to run a re-election campaign in which she or he would transform the financial capital into more social capital in the town. So he tried to put all of these valuable resources together into 8 forms of capital map, which you are looking at this point. The social capital is influence and connections. And so a person or entity who has good social capital can ask favors, influence decisions, and communicate efficiently. Social capital is of primary importance in politics, business, and community organizing. Material capital is non-living physical objects from material capital. Raw and processed resources like stone, metal, timber, and fossil fuels are complexed with each other to create more sophisticated materials or structures. Modern buildings, bridges, and other pieces of infrastructure, along with tools, computers, and other technologies, are complex from forms of material capital. Financial capital, this is the one that we're most familiar with, and for example, this means money, currencies, securities, and other instruments of global financial system. The current global society focuses enormous amounts of attention on financial capital. So it's our primary tool for exchanging goods and services with other humans. It can be a powerful tool for oppression or potentially liberation. Living capital. A precious metal dealer who attended both financial permaculture courses advises, rather than US dollars, measure your wealth in ounces of gold and silver. Recognizing that precious metals are just another form of financial capital, Catherine Austin Fitts recommends that we diversify and measure our wealth in ounces, acres, and hoops. Living capital is made up of animals, plants, water, and soil of our land, the true basis for life on our planet. Permaculture design teaches us the principles and practices for rapid creation of living capital. Permaculture encourages us to share the abundance of living capital rather than the intangible wealth of financial capital. So in this course, we will be looking at what permaculture does to us and how we can practice permaculture also in our neighborhoods. Natural capitalism focuses more on slightly updated system of capitalism than on the true wealth of living systems. The current slow money movement is also making strides in a similar direction, seeking to transfer financial capital into living forms of soil, animals, and agriculture. Now, on to intellectual capital. This is the best described as knowledge asset. The majority of the current global education system is focused on imparting intellectual capital. Whether or not it is the most useful form of capital for creating resilient and thriving communities. Having intellectual capital is seen as the surest way to be successful. Science and research can focus on obtaining intellectual capital or truth, though it is often motivated by the desire for financial or social capital. For example, going to university is primarily an exchange of financial capital for intellectual capital. It is supposed to prepare people for the rest of their lives in the world. Experiential or human capital. We accumulate experiential capital through actually organizing a project into our community or building a strawable house or completing a permaculture design, meaning like you're building a house system with that catches water and you can grow your own food and you rely on renewable energy, something like that. That's kind of permaculture design. The most effective way to learn anything comes through a blended gathering of intellectual and experiential capital. So in his personal experience in master's degree at Gaia University, he understood that experiential learning is essential for many effective functioning in the world. Of his effective functioning in the world. He says he was able to do projects instead of take classes, and now he's collaborating and organizing local permaculture guild and co-running a successful permaculture design firm. So the spiritual capital is one that practices their religion, spirituality, or other means of connection to self and the universe. One may accumulate spiritual capital in that form. It contains aspects of intellectual and experiential capital, but it is deeper, more personal, and less quantified. So many of the world's religion include the concept of the great chain of being and understanding existence, where spiritual attainment leads to different levels of being. So there's also the concept of karma in Buddhism, which means just reaping the benefits of or the consequences of whatever actions that you have. So if you do good now, you can reap the benefits. You can receive the good benefits that reflect back onto you. If you do bad now, you're going to also reap these benefits later on. So it's kind of like your own money or wealth in the bank, but in another form in this sense. Cultural capital. This is cultural capital can only be gathered by a community of people. And it describes the shared internal and external processes of a community, the works of art and theater, for example, the songs that every child learns, the ability to come together in celebration of harvest or for a religious holiday. Cultural capital cannot be gathered by individuals alone. It could be viewed as an emergent property of the complex system of intercapital exchanges that takes place in a village, city, or bioregion, nation, school community, or an eco-village, let's say. Now, the properties of this system, the map clarifies that money is not the only form of capital. So this map expands the concepts of wealth and poverty to include valuable resources of personal connections, natural resources, land, knowledge, experience, and more. So it provides a language for permaculture designers to communicate the value of healthy soil and healthy communities to people immersed in the current mindset of global capitalism, where financial capital is the only reality. So there are two types of flow between pools of capital. There is intra-capital flows between the same type of capital. For example, we can say US dollars to purchase a stock or bond, or exchanging tomato seeds for a carton of eggs. Intercapital flows between different types of capital. For example, paying for a 2-year apprenticeship with a master's builder would be an exchange of financial capital for experiential, intellectual, or even social capital. For example, some people, they stay on farms to learn or to help, for example, in working on this farm, but they also learn at the same time how permaculture design is being implemented. So then they go back and they design their own permaculture school, let's say, or farm. For the types of currencies over here, we can see that Currencies can also, in capital, if we have social capital, the currency could be the connections, which complex to influence and relationships. If we have material capital, the currency would be natural resources, which complex to tools, buildings, and infrastructure. If we have financial capital, this means money, and this can mean financial instruments and securities. Living capital, such as, for example, carbon, nitrogen, and water, this complexes to soil, living organisms, land, and ecosystem services. Intellectual capital means ideas, knowledge, and complexes to words, images, and intellectual property. Experiential capital is everything related to moving to other places, taking a course, living with some people, having these experiences when you move and travel. So it's under the currency of action, and it comes into experience and wisdom. And a lot of people, including myself, they didn't save money at some point in their life because they wanted to go out and about and gain this experience that travel gives them. And so, but they gained a lot of wealth that came from there, and it helped to propel them in life and gave them the tools and skills to start something new and therefore generate more wealth, let's say in the form of financial wealth, in the form of also relationships, in the form of spiritual as well, and cultural. So you become rich and more well-rounded, and at the same time you can become more grounded if you connect more with, if you know how to connect more with earth through your travel and with people. The spiritual capital is, in the currency for that, is prayer, intention, faith, and karma, complexing to spiritual attainment. And cultural capital, with the currency of song, story, ritual, and complexing to building a community. Now, we need to form a balance in our life between these different types of wealth. And so for a futuristic look, we try to think of ways on how can we invent and affect the future so we can basically, in our future generations, to move beyond finance into living and cultural capital. So these have the greatest potential for positive systematic change. As Mollison writes, we should develop or create wealth just as we develop landscapes by conserving energy and natural resources, and by developing procreative assets. And basically, only through songs and stories and shared ethics of cultural capital, we can focus on living capital, and that can be sustained for 7 generations. And also we can think of capital, there's also eco-friendly ways of making money and technologies. And this is where our next focus is going to be also in this part of this course.